Hello friends, and happy Women's History Month. My name is Miss Carla Diaz, and I'm so happy to be with here today. In honor of Women's History Month, where we honor all the wonderful contributions women have made in our society, I'll be reading a book about Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was an American poet who used her words and imagination to write beautiful poems. I'll be reading On Wings of Words, The Extraordinary Life of Emily Dickinson by Jennifer Byrne, illustrated by Becca Standler, with permission of Chronicle Books. Soft moonlit snow draped the Dickinson house in white. It reaches to the fence, it wraps it rail by rail. It's lost in fleeces, it flings a crystal veil. In a little room in a dark before dawn, a baby girl was born. Her parents celebrated the holiday they called Emily. Emily met the world and began to explore. To little Emily, every bird, every flower, every bee or breeze, slant of light seemed to speak to her. She explored with her eyes, her ears, her thoughts, and found words for everything she was discovering. The bee is not afraid of me. I know the butterfly. The brooks laugh louder when I come. When thunder crashed and lightning flashed, Emily got scared and called it the fire. Emily adored her older brother Austin. She said there was always such a hurrah wherever he was. She loved her school friends, who she said were a warmth as near if the sun were shining on your hand. Every day Emily's life rippled with new joys and swayed with new feelings. It was clear Emily was becoming a person, in many ways like other people, only more so. Her happies were happy, her sads were sadder, her thoughts were deeper, her desires were stronger. And oh, there was so much that Emily loved. My heart grows light so fast that I could mount a grasshopper and gallop around the world and not fatigue him any. Most of all, Emily loved her books, the strongest of friends, of the soul books. To Emily, every book was an adventure, a distant journey on a sea of words, and if a book was forbidden, well, that didn't stop Emily. Like books she had wanted that Austin smuggled into the house and hid inside a piano, Emily rushed it up into her room and read it in delicious secrecy. Every story she read at night by candlelight or in the garden's midday sun was a new passion, a ray of light. But there were shadows too. In the 1800s, sorrow was a daily companion. The sorrow of diseases incurable, accidents untreatable, and deaths too soon, too close. All of this frightened Emily and flooded her mind with question. Emily tried to find answers at home. She looked for answers at church. She searched for answers at school. But everywhere she looked, she was to obey without asking, to believe without knowing why. So she began to put her own faith in stuff that she understood. In the name of the bee and of the butterfly and of the breeze. Amen. When her very religious school principal separated the class into hopers and no hopers, Emily was put into the group without hope. Yet Emily did have hope. She had her own kind. Hope is a thing without feathers that perches to the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. So with hope, she sought her truth. I am out with lanterns looking for myself. Then, like rays of sun breaking through the clouds, her thoughts and feelings started to come to her own as words, new words, her own words. The robins, the bumblebees, the daisies she loved, the dark diseases and frightening deaths, the unknowable God and mysterious heaven all came pouring out as poems. Things are budding and springing and singing. Answers she couldn't find in other people, she started to find in herself. I have been dreaming a golden dream with eyes all while open. Her poem soothed her sadness, gave her strength, set her free. With the power of her words and the freedom of her imagination, she tasted spices in foreign lands and hid inside a flower. She leaned against the sun, dwelt in a house of possibilities, and rode a carriage to the ends of time. She became a bird, a worm, a ghost, a god, a beggar, a king, somebody, a nobody. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'll banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog. To tell your name, the livelong June. I'm an admiring fog. She called her poems my letter to the world that never wrote to me. And so, with her words, her mind, Emily dove into the darkest depths of the sea and of sadness. She rose up to the glowing heights of the sun and of joy. Emily saw the inner world was bigger than all of the world outside. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one on the other will contain with ease, and you beside. Emily spent more and more time in her room, writing, creating. She ventured out less and less. Exhilaration within. As Emily's inner world grew bigger, her outer world grew smaller. Yes, there were things she still loved in the worldly world. She loved her gardens, the bees, the springtime, and the wind combing its fingers through the trees. And of course, her family. A few very special friends, her big dog, Carlo, and the children. Emily always loved children. But most people she saw rarely, or not at all. Emily began to dress in white, white like the clouds, like foam on a wave, white like a cocoon in her own room from which butterflies were born, butterflies that were poems that flew with Emily on wings of words. People in the town said Emily was weird. Emily was strange. But Emily didn't care what they said of her. Her world was somewhere else. My country is truth. Emily never stopped writing, never stopped exploring. With every day and every poem, she saw more and discovered more, traveled deeper, soared higher for the rest of her life. On a Saturday in May in 1886, Emily died, slipping into the eternity she had wondered about and written about all of her life. Then something wonderful and amazing happened. Emily's sister, Vinnie, opened drawers, trunks, boxes, and closets and found hundreds of Emily's poems, more than anyone had ever imagined. Poems that, on the wings of Emily's words, flew out and away into the future and around the world. Today, most every library, every bookstore, every school, and every city, state, and country has Emily's poems, Emily's words, Emily's letters to each of us. The world is sleeping. We must be crowing cocks and singing larks and a rising sun to awaken her. And in those words, you can hear Emily's voice echoing through the years, speaking to you, to all of us who are brave enough to take in pen in hand, to look deep and to write what we discovered. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors. Of visitors, the fairest for occupation this, the spreading wide, my narrow hands to gather paradise.